Vern, I'm glad we're getting a chance to chat about leadership, construct of sort of organization's trajectory. And you've got quite a, let's call it, legacy experience in helping CEOs build organizations that are either coming up out of the ground or their intention is to move to acquisition transaction of some sort. And I think today we're going to talk about two in particular.
Yes,
right?
yep. I think we're going to talk about EV3 and Wright Medical.
Yeah. And with that, if I'm not incorrect, you had the same skipper at the helm.
That's right.
On both of those who believed in this system.
Yeah, Bob Palmisano was CEO of both, and I had worked for him as chief commercial officer in two prior companies that were also successful through this this same management system.
Yeah.
And at EV3, I became a coach of the system.
And when we talk about a system, and this is the HPMS system,
That's
and the
correct.
high performance management system, we'll chat about that, and it's something that the Mullings Group's also incorporated, and I needed to get into the bottom of that, being an engineer as well. But let's stay on Palmisano and Wright and EV3 for a second. EV3 was what, 2.6 billion?
Yes.
On an acquisition?
Yep, to Covidian.
To Covidian, and then Wright was?
5 billion.
5 billion.
To Stryker.
In relatively short amount of time, in relative terms of building value, EV3 with the roll up, and then Wright with making very difficult decisions and then executing on that.
Yes. Yep, a lot of commonality, but some subtle differences, I think, between those two journeys.
Yeah. So let's for our listeners, let's put up the tent poles that are common among the HPMS system. And again,
Okay.
using these two, and then let's put those tent poles up, and then let's see where they declared themselves that led to success in both of those transactions.
Excellent. I think there are four tent poles, if you will, or pillars in the system, and I think these are critical for any leader, and particularly newly appointed leaders. Number one is establishing a vision, a long-range set of plans and goals that are motivational for the team. Best case, those are developed as a team through facilitation, like we did, with your group. Second is culture. If we're going to be the world's best, how must we behave along the way, right? And that can't be 100 different things. It should be, sort of 4 to 6 stretch types of values that determine the culture you need as a leader, right? You don't want to leave that to chance. The third pole or pillar is a vital few focus. If everything's important, nothing's important. And so how do we Pareto our strategy to the 20% of the items that are going to close 80% of our strategic gap, right, into a short list of absolute must-dos. And then fourthly is a common language for execution that's based in quality principles, that's closed loop, that allows for continuous improvement, that uses a common language and methodology that everybody can get around. Not too different than what a winning football team does. They have a common language. They call all the, everyone knows what each play means on that field.
And they're rolling the play.
And they're rolling the play, right? So it sounds simple, having a common language, but it's amazing how many companies don't have common language.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And one of the things that was really important was while there was a skipper, all four of these pillars, tent poles, were determined by the workforce.
Yeah, I'd say, sure, all employees are surveyed, right? So you're collecting all of that. All customers are surveyed.
Right. So let's not sleep on the survey, because
Yep.
this is something that, as I see some leaders will come in and say, this is what we're going to do.
Right.
Well, what are you basing that on? So let's do the survey. Let's pay some homage to the survey here. When an HPMS system comes in, as in the case with Wright and in the case with EV3, tell me who the customers are. Let's break out customers or shareholders, customers or customers. In the case of medical device, customers or employees.
Yep. So before you have your group session within the HPMS framework, you need great inputs. You need great data and information from the customer through customer survey, perhaps customer interviews. You need terrific employee data. And you also need the voice of the shareholder. You need to understand, and that's pretty straightforward in a public company. It's somewhat more nuanced in a private company, but nonetheless, you've got to bring each of those key stakeholders into the room with the management team so that you're making the best possible decisions based on that data and information.
So let's start on EV3, because EV3 made an interesting pivot. For those that might not have the legacy, that was a roll-up of, was it 4 different businesses?
At least 4,
At least 4 different businesses, so 4 different major businesses. And they had pivoted away from what appeared to be a pathway that they were or could have pursued.
Yes. Well, EV3 represented the 3 vascular spaces: cardiovascular, neurovascular, and peripheral vascular. Before HPMS, they were the company was kind of going after everything, right? And each week almost there were different priorities, and it was very reactionary, and all that changed within the HPMS system, with the biggest change being the decision to drop cardiovascular altogether and focus exclusively on neurovascular and peripheral vascular, and even within those businesses, focusing intently on thrombectomy in the neurovascular side and developing the proof to become standard of care in that space over TPA, and in the peripheral space in mechanical atherectomy.
How did you get to those decisions? Take me behind the scenes. Was that over 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, or was it in a tight period?
It was it was after we got all the inputs from those key stakeholders. It was taking the 30 top leaders in the organization and putting them in a room for a couple of days and forcing those decisions, actually using forced voting, which you're familiar with, and calling some early plays and setting some early direction, making some difficult decisions, again, understanding that, hey, if we're going to have a vital few focus, we've all got to figure out what that vital few focus is together as a team, and buy in, and even sort of beyond that, who were the key influencers on that team? I remember Dave Mowry and Stacy and Sing Sing and Brett Wall. They were all key influencers in those businesses, and Bob paid special attention to those folks, knowing, hey, if I need these followers, these 2s and 3s, to be right with me on this change, because it's not going to be easy. A lot of people are going to resist it, right? Because it's so different from what we've been doing previously.
Yeah. And the forced voting is something that is really culturally like cold water in the face if you're not used to that.
That's right.
Like, I mean, I've sat through you with some other clients that I got to be an active observer on, and that forced voting at first is incredibly uncomfortable, and I think we talked about it. It's making the sausage, and in the middle of it, you can see the friction.
Yes.
The forced intentional friction. But at the end of it, as you always say, you're going to love the outcome. When you get those vital few, those vital 2 or 3 things, and we're not going to focus on that, sets a priority in everything. Take me through that in a tight fashion about what happens from there.
From there, once you've you've forced the vote, and typically it Pareto's out, and you see, from those votes, through that voting, you see the 20% of the items that are going to close 80% of your gap, right? From there, it's about operationalizing them, assigning accountable leaders to each. We call that one throat to choke, right? We're not forming committees. We're placing individuals in ownership positions, and then populating those vital few initiatives with diverse teams that are cross-functional, cross-layer, cross-geography, to ensure that there's alignment. The more often you take a cross-functional, a diverse team, and you go through a process of current state and future state, the more aligned the company becomes over time, because more and more people understand, okay, this is where we are right now, this is where we need to go. It doesn't happen overnight, but the more often you flex that muscle, the more aligned the whole organization gets over time. And that's a benefit of having a system, is alignment. And you hear that in companies that don't have systems. They often talk about, gee, we're misaligned. We're butting heads. We're not, we don't see the problem or the opportunity always the same way. And that's a symptom of a company that doesn't have a good system, or a football team that, if you see guys running the wrong plays or running into each other in the field, you're going to say, well, that football team is not playing through a good system. Right. They're playing as individuals, and they're not winning games as a result of that. And so I think the sports analogies really are highly relevant.
And then one of the other things too is I noticed with the HPMS system is it starts to rapidly trickle down to behaviors from the C-suite, even at the operator level.
Yes.
Everybody, and this leads us into the language.
Yes.
And the success trees.
Yes. Yeah. So common language is critical on those vital few. We use structured, a very structured approach of determining the current state, the future state, the gap, and then developing a plan to close that gap. The ancestor of that is the scientific method. So, as fellow engineering-minded guys, we get that, right? Not everybody sort of gets that, the power of having a closed-loop process. But where it really takes off, and I've seen this hundreds of times, is when it trickles down, and that same problem-solving methodology is used within the function, within the department, within the geography, and in small teams, and in perhaps a less formal way, right? My mentor, Dick Palermo, used to call it a verbal job ticket. That it doesn't have to. Not everything has to be documented. Not everything has to be formal. But more importantly, it's when teams in the trenches are using a common language. Deming's Plan, Do, Check, Act is probably the highest, and earliest example of that, using a common language in production, with non-engineering technicians on a production line using a closed loop scientific approach to improving quality, yield, or whatever on the production line.
So let's come back to Palmisano, and let's come back to EV3 and eventually his lieutenants, if you will, his number 2s and number 3s,
yes,
that today are icons in the industry.
That's right.
And they probably use that system, if
That's
I had
right.
to guess, that Brett does,
sure
Stacy do,
yep.
right? And Mauri does, right? They
That's
still
right.
use this
That's
system.
right.
So let's unpack the EV3. So give me the timeline on that, and just give me the big milestones in there that you had coached Palmisano and the team through.
Yeah, I think it was again some big decisions. Number one, we're not playing in cardiovascular. Number two, in peripheral, we've got to solve for this Fox Hollow acquisition that had kind of gone south on the company, and we've got to, and that was solving for that was a vital few. And that was really, a lot of that was strategy, helping the salespeople understand how it fit into the bag relative to stents and balloons, right? They had been competing against mechanical atherectomy, and you had sort of a combination of Fox Hollow reps and legacy EV3 reps, and so we developed a mantra to lead with atherectomy, and then a lot of it was process. We benchmarked the top 5 atherectomy reps in the country We mapped their sales process from prospecting to loyal repeating customer. We put all that together into a kind of a unified map, launched at a national sales meeting. So, and literally, within months of that national sales meeting and the new process and understanding where it fit in the bag and getting everybody on the same page, that product line started to regain traction and get back into a growth state. There was a lot of change management involved in that. Having the key measure of what we referred to as hawkers was a key aspect of that, of that journey. So that was, that was one. And then back on the neurovascular side, it was, how do we become standard of care in large vessel occlusion? And at that point in time, TPA was standard of care, and thrombectomy was interesting but considered unproven, right? There wasn't comparative clinical evidence to support the effectiveness of mechanical thrombectomy, and so the company made a big play and a big bet, expensive bet, on a comparative study. And that was probably the vital one in neurovascular. And I think most people know that when that study came out, guidelines were changed, and that business started growing 25% compounded quarterly at terrific margins, right? And so it was, again, that focus of saying, this is what we must do. We're going to resource this one area intensely. There were other products, obviously, that and some other acquisitions that were critical in neurovascular, but that was the big one, and that took that took some guts.
Yep.
Because go ahead.
One of the things that's really important for people to understand is leaders come in and say, I got a system, I've got a system, I've got a system. And that system usually stays very close to the executive suite. And it's not as formalized. And again, we've lived this at TMG. And I've watched it working with you with other organizations. And this is highly documented. Everybody's got a success tree.
That's right.
There's a ticket that you work to. If you're stuck on a decision, you just need to refer to the vital few that have been documented, memorialized, and put on the factory floor wall and the executive suite wall. Like, this is mapped. There's no audibles called other than these quick stand-up meetings, these quick check-ins. And this would people who are watching this will go, well, we do that in QA all the time, QC all the time. Deming did that all the time. Six Sigma does that all the time. But it rarely works its way up to the executive suite as a behavior.
That's right. It's a great observation, Joe. When you go to a factory, a well-run factory, you see quality. You see quality principles, you see visual management, there's a stand-up area, there's red, green, yellow, there's common language. But in many companies, the further you get from the factory floor to the executive suite, the less common you're going to see those principles. It tends to get to it becomes more activity-based, it becomes, saying a free-for-all is probably an extreme statement, but it's whoever, whoever has the most influence.
And you can't have your own agenda either. See, what this does is eliminates side agendas that people will have in the executive suite because it's part of executive survival. You and I have seen this in our 30-plus years together.
That's right.
It eliminates the side agendas that people have to move their own careers forward. It sets that vital few down, and whenever you want to go off script, you're like, that does not map to what we all agreed, unless there's a reason that we all get together, and we're going through this right now, is we're reviewing our vital three that we established almost a year ago, and saying, okay, as an organization, not the CEO making the change, as an organization, are we going to change one, two, or all three of those as we move forward based on our ability that we met them to date?
Yeah, Yep. So, and that's continuous improvement, right? So
Correct.
that's having a closed loop system, which is again a concept that that a results-oriented manager may not fully grasp, right? When I learned these principles over 25 years ago, Palermo said you can't let perfect get in the way of good enough, and that initially I thought, well, see that, gosh, that doesn't actually sound like how I've been kind of trained to this point. I've been trained in thinking that it needs to be perfect. But what he further said was, don't let perfect get in the way of good enough and moving quickly in a system that's closed loop, so that if it's not perfect, you can come back and and so in companies that do that well, on their high touch, whether it's through stoplight reporting or any other mechanism, it's what's the better plan? That's the plan that we sprinted to in 30 days. Is this still the best plan, or is there a better plan, right? And if there is, having the agility or the flexibility to improve the plan on the fly, right? So business just moves too quickly to have annual plans, right? And or even in some cases 6-month plans. You need a system that allows high touch, not overdone, kind of like a stand-up, right, on strategy, that allows that agility and that movement along with the structure of a process. So kind of, the best of both worlds. Structure, teamwork, process combined with agility and flexibility.
And all this is documented in a system with HPMS. I want to come back because there was a really interesting, who did it? Somebody brought up Musk, Elon, recently, and he explained why Elon is so wildly successful. He said what Elon does is comes in whether you love him or hate him, you have to give, I love him by the way, you have to give him credit, because I think he is by far the most structured, not appearing to be, problem solver that we've seen in maybe ever in business. And what he does is he'll take all 4 of his companies and he shows up in each of them once a week. And he says, what's the biggest problem right now that we have? That's the only problem I want to come here to solve. And then what he'll do is find out what the problem is, bring in the people, throw all the resources at that problem, get them set, and they go on their way. And then he goes to his other company and does that 52 times a year, once a week. And when you start to solve the #1 problem in an organization, and you put that on the agenda once a week, you move orders of magnitude away from current state to future state and your competition.
That's right. Yep. Focusing on the breakthroughs, right? The big boulders, I think, is a key to leadership and to Musk's approach. He didn't come in and say, show me the 20 problems we have. What is the biggest single problem that we're faced with today? And let's tackle that. Let's not incrementally move 10 things down the road. Let's get a breakthrough in the one thing that's holding us back. And the more often you do that, the more likely you are to take your company to a different place, right? Think about, taking big steps or running versus shuffling along the, and that's kind of the mindset. And I've seen that as an operator. I've seen that as a consultant when companies do that well. In 1, 2, 3, 5 years, they're a different company because they've taken those big steps. They've solved the big problems in succession. And sometimes you don't see it while you're kind of in the trenches solving the problems. But when you step back and say, gee, that really was critical to going from a $500 million market cap to a $2.6 billion acquisition.
Let's talk about Wright Medical now. So we'll jump out of EV3. Let's talk about Wright. Tell me about those 4 pillars, those 4 tent poles, and then how Bob came in and you were part of that. And again, take me through what were the steps in there that got us to that exit.
Again, a lot of some bold moves early on.
But not spitballing them. This is a system now.
Yeah, it's a system and it's a team sport and everybody was involved. But I think the biggest one, there were 2 big ones early on, but the biggest first one was divesting knees and hips, which were a significant part of the revenue of the company. Yet Wright was a 3% share player in that space, right? And Bob said, we're never going to be a major player in hip and knee based on our market position. So we're going to sell that off, and then we're going to focus on foot and ankle. We're going to focus on a growth segment, very risky, right? Really kind of, in many ways, bet the farm on foot and ankle, which was not a mature market at the time. It's interesting looking now. This was, I mean, we're going back several years to that decision, but now you look at, today, I think Stryker just made a big move.
Zimmer
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
Zimmer,
made a big move in the foot and ankle acquisition that was announced, I think, yesterday. And so we're now seeing how prescient that move was to focus on that, that specific space. The other bold move was to go direct. The company had, was all 1099 reps, which we see a lot in orthopedics and spine, right? And the company and Bob made a decision, again in the session like we were talking about, to convert the entire sales force from 1099s to direct. And Bob's edict was to do it in 30 days.
This is what I love about this system, is you can execute on one of the vital few in a very short period of time versus the corporate masturbation that takes place in a lot of these organizations over 6 months to a year, because there's a protectionism around paychecks and car payments and careers.
Yep, that's right.
And that's where the person puts themselves before the logo.
That's right. Yep. And it took 90 days to make the whole change, but the folks that were initially tasked with that thought, well, this is nuts. We haven't done anything big in 30 days ever, and he's asked to do this huge thing in 30 days. But after, post-action review showed the strength in that in using speed, because once it was announced that this was happening, the market for those reps, the ones that were in the better distributors that wanted to convert to W2 were in play, and so speed was of the essence in getting it done. But once they got to the other side of that, they were able to control their message in the field, control the training, control the quality, control so many things that, as you know, when you're running an independent organization, you're not in control of.
Never.
So that was a breakthrough. Those two things, I think, were, as I reflect back, were two of the biggest, most difficult, but early decisions to start transforming the company.
Yeah. So just as we wrap up this session, with whatever you can share, because some of your stuff is proprietary, the medical device companies over the last period of time that have taken in HPMS and incorporated it in some fashion, whether it's the vertical in ophthalmology, cardiology, any vascular, orthopedic, wherever it is. Are there others that have done that? Because I know you advertise them as clients in the past in the public domain. So I want our listeners to understand that this system is being used very broadly in high-performing organizations and organizations that are transforming.
Yeah, well, Joe, I think you mentioned that you were in a session with me recently that was with Orthofix C-Spine, and that that they're early innings with the system, but that's an ideal case for this system. You have a new CEO in Massimo Calafiore. You have two companies coming together. You have two different cultures coming together. You have 100 priorities. You have different languages. You have different cultures, right? How do you play to win? Well, you need a common vision. You need a common set of of values and culture and behavior. You need a clear set of vital few, and you need a system for execution. And I'm sure that we'll see some great things out of that organization. Another one that, that we've been doing a lot of work with, that you're familiar with too, is Cordis. Again, coming out of Cardinal Health, a bit dinged up from lack of investment and perhaps lack of understanding of device, of what it takes to be a winner in device. But with a CEO who's very experienced in HPMS, going back to Spectranetics, Scott Drake, and through ViewRay and into Cordis. What I love about what Scott and his team have done there is they've branded their system as the Cordis Business System. It's the way they do business, and it has all the elements that we've talked about, and we're going to see some great things there too. It's still in process, but I know that the chassis side of it, on the Cordis Business System side of it, it continues to improve, and is well positioned for what Cordis X is going to bring on the innovation side. So those are two that I think, on the bigger end of the spectrum, from a revenue standpoint. But I also work with a lot of startups. 20 people, 30 people, a Series A, or 100 people, 200 people, whatever, tens of millions of dollars. And what I like about HPMS and everything that we've talked about so far is that it's size agnostic. It really doesn't matter if you're a Cordis or an Orthofix or a startup.
One of the things in closing, what I would share is, as a leader who's had the privilege and the burden of trying to articulate the vision that we have in our head as founders and creatives, is our team gets it. They think they know where we're going, and we try and communicate it. But with HPMS, it's a documented system and it's a book, and it's put down, memorialized. And what I've watched in our organization and other organizations is everybody knows the roadmap now.
Yes.
And like they've got the GPS.
That's right.
And they're like, decision, map it. Decision, map it. Vital few, what does it map to? And so as a leader, I have found that liberating, allowing me to go off and do other creative things. And I have my own 3 vital few to grow the organization, as well as my other executive leaders. They have their vital few, but they all map to what TMG's vital few are. So as a leader, it becomes incredibly empowering, enabling, and then frees you up so you don't have to continue to articulate the vision. And somebody knows exactly what it is and where it's going. So that's what I would leave us with, at least for this session, is it is freed up my brain to do the things that sort of got us here in the first place, that help make these big rocks move.
That's right.
Right? Like a dragonfly, right? Yep. Like our search business, like our advisory business, right?
It frees you up.
Frees us up.
Because once you get your, a management system is really connected process, right? So if you have a strategy, you have a process for strategy, that's great. If you have a process for execution, that's great. When you couple them, when you link those processes, you built a system, right? And I do remember, back to Wright, I think it was about 18 months in, Bob Pompasano said, he said, I'm in a good place. I've got my processes down, and now I can focus more on other things, right? Because I know that the organization is executing through this system. They're playing well. I can look at the bigger stuff. I can spend more time with customers. I can spend more time with employees. I can spend more time thinking about where we need to be in 3 to 5 years. And that's really, I think the things that a great leader does on top of a system.
Agreed. Well, thanks, Bern.
Thank you, Joe. Always a pleasure.
I'm Joe Mullings from 160 Studios. Be well.